Hello there YouTubers, this is my wife's 2009 Nissan Qashqai. I usually said X-Trail things, that's all I seem to work on lately. In actual fact they're very similar to the T31 X-Trail. They've got the same suspension arms and ball joints and brake bits and all sorts of things, so it makes it convenient for me since the rest of my family seem to have T31s. A slight pain with this is, as you can see, the spark plugs are underneath here, underneath this inlet manifold. You can see the tops of the coil packs there and there and there, so you could get to that one but you can't get to the other three, so unfortunately this manifold's going to have to come off. By the look of it, with a bit of a look, the tools you're going to need is a quarter drive ratchet extension bar with an 8mm socket, 10mm socket on the end of the 3/8, 14mm plug socket. This is a thin-walled one. I don't know whether it's going to need a thin-walled one, but you know, if you're going to buy one of these, they're only £2 or £3 on eBay. 10mm spanner to, I think, undo a bolt on the back of there. There's 4 bolts down in here and here and here and here on the manifold. There's 4 8mm ones here. Have to undo this clip on the I guess that's the no, that's the mass airflow sensor there. So on this throttle body thing or whatever it is, that's going to have to come off, and I think there's going to be an electrical connection there and that little hose there. Well, that pops off anyway. I was going to put the grips on there just to squeeze that up, but so that's about that. And there's 4 8mm bolts round this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to loosen some of this stuff off and see how we get on. Yeah, and I remember what I wanted the 10mm spanner for. It's for just whipping the battery off, so we don't have any unforeseen situations. Always a good idea whenever you're going to work on the electrical system of your car. There we go, negative side disconnected. As you can see, there's a series of bolts down the bottom of here, and they are reasonably tight. Not a thing to do one-handed while you're trying to film, but you can see where they all are. Down in there, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 5. So we'll get those out. I've undone the bolt that goes in there. Here he is. Right, crack on. Right, I've cracked all these bolts now, so I'm just going to spin them out with a socket and hopefully not drop the bolts. I must admit, it's the only car I've ever seen. I mean, I expect there are others. It's the only one I've ever seen where you've got to take the intake manifold off to access the spark plugs and the coil packs and all that stuff. I mean, we've had this car probably 3 or 4 years, and you know, I've given it oil changes and it's got a few miles on it, so I did change the gearbox oil as well. There's the old bolts there. Put them all carefully to one side. But I suspect, I mean, the car did have a service history when I bought it, but I suspect, you know, once it gets towards a few miles, people stop taking it to main dealers where they would, you could probably hope they would change the spark plugs, and sort of more, well, not backstreet guys, but you know, your local neighbourhood mechanic sort of firms, and whether they'd bother changing the spark plugs if the engine was running okay. But he has developed a very slight misfire. When you accelerate a bit and maybe slightly too high a gear, he sort of judders a little bit. So there's no engine management lights on or codes, any of that. So you've got to be looking at something that doesn't flag codes up, and I think things like you know, slightly worn spark plugs aren't going to do that. That's all before. Let's get this one out. Come on, Mr. Spark Plug, Mr. Bolt rather, out. Right, I'm now going to undo this hose clamp on there, and I've noticed, I don't know whether you can see in the camera, but that rubber boot there, pipe, looks rather cracked around there. Now, I suspect that's probably a pretty expensive part, and to be honest, if it is cracked through and is sucking air in, that won't help things. So I will probably seal that around with a little bit of mastic, just to make sure it's airtight, because you don't want to get air getting sucked in there. It won't help the running at all. Right, we're undoing the bolts on the throttle body or whatever it is. There is a bolt down in there which might actually be easier than undoing all this. I'm not quite sure at the moment, but it's difficult to get to, so I think we stick with this for a moment. I've loosened that hose clamp off there, and this this nut here, adding to the tool count here, is easier to undo by getting a spanner in, 8mm spanner like that. It's slightly awkward to crack it with the ratchet. A point to make about this too is when you're working on stuff like this, don't be leaning on this, because it is plastic. I mean, it's pretty tough plastic, but you don't want to be breaking it, because you'll be in all sorts of trouble. Right, you can get on that one with the slightly cranked socket thing. Couldn't have to undo it anyway. Where the fingers are going there now, I don't know. Dropping tools here, and the great part about it being a day, that's the other point about this hose clamp, doesn't like to turn because it's sort of held by this little rubber thingy there. So I don't want to be pulling it around too much. It's a bit annoying because that's right where the hose clamp bit is, unless I completely undo it and take it right off, which is what I think I'm going to do. Right, that's a bit easier. We've got the hose clamp thing out of the way, so we can get the socket on there and hopefully undo that. It's funny how sometimes it's easier to take the ratchet off. It's still fairly tight. Still, I think I'll struggle with this off camera because it's kind of boring for you people. Yeah, so it is easier to push the rubber hose thing out of the way because there is another bolt down in there, the fourth one. I thought there would be somehow. So hopefully when we get this one off, you can see this is all coming loose now, so we'll whip that one off. Once you've got the throttle body all loose and the hose off, so you might as well have done that in the first place. There is a bolt down there, which is another 10mm one that's the final thing securing the intake manifold. So we'll undo that one and hopefully it'll all come off then. To get it to come off, you've got to undo this because the thing won't come past this bracket. Notice there's a hose back here as well, and I've also disconnected that cable there from there and a hose from there. Make sure it all goes back. This one has to come off anyway, so you may well as well not undone that one, just undone this one in the first place. So I think once this one's out, be all very careful you're not dropping these bolts and things like that down in the engine. That's pretty normal. So we take him out and drop the bolt up at the scuttle there with the rest of them, so you don't lose it. And hopefully now this whole manifold will drop the bracket, wobbling on the floor. Right, comes the manifold, and we'll just leave that hanging over there out of the way while I do some groveling on the floor and find the bracket. These are the coil packs here which fire the plugs. These are all Bosch ones by the look of it. So that looks like 10mm bolt to undo those one at a time, and that's the next step when I find my bracket on the floor. And coil packs undo with the 10mm bolt on top, and it just nipped. You don't need to go mad. And this is the thing I could emphasise to you, but all these things, especially when you're screwing spark plugs in, you don't want to be putting a lot of force on it. It's 3/8 ratchet, held close there, not swinging on the full length of it, putting lots of torque on it, running the risk of snapping it off. And I had some guy in a previous video complaining that, oh, you know, I should be using a torque wrench and all that, but you know, I've put millions of spark plugs in, well, not millions, but quite a few in my time, and they just need a faint nip. They do not need to be tightened right down. And also, the same guy was moaning that, oh, why was I putting copper slip on the plug threads? Well, you know, if you've ever had plugs stuck in engines before and had to get helicals inserted when you were a bit skint and really didn't need that expense, the sake of a little wipe of copper slip around the plug threads ensures that they all come out. Shouldn't be any reason for mixing any of these core packs up. You should just pull out like so. There they go. And there's the plug down in there, and I think we are going to be wanting this thin walled socket, whatever I've done with it. I'm really good at this. I have to say, one thing that strikes me these days is the cost of spark plugs is getting to be a bit breathtaking. I mean, I know these are iridium spark plugs, they're not. What have I done with that socket? So you don't get this on proper documentaries on the BBC, people looking for the sockets. Right, I found my socket, and these plugs are a little bit sticky down in there, that one is anyway. Bit of copper slip, not the Renault or Nissan, I don't know if these are a Renault engine or actually Nissan. They wouldn't do that when they put them together in the factory, but I think it's a good idea. No doubt somebody will be making comments about that. Right, there's the plug. Does look like it's had its useful life. That's a pretty big gap on there, so and you can see how dry the threads are. So we put in our new ones down in there. Cardboard didn't want to come off the plug. Right, well, this is a new one. You can see that that is a little bit smaller gap and altogether better. These are some Bosch ones which I managed to get off eBay. A guy was selling them, they're the correct ones. But I paid 20 quid for the 4, which is not too bad, because awful lot of people, I mean, you can pay 12, 13, 14 pound per plug. You know, I like NGK plugs generally, but I think most of those were £12.95 a plug, so you know, 4 plugs is like over 50 quid. Not cheap. Right, here we go then. And I emphasise, a very light smear of copper slip on there, keeping well away from the electrodes. So popping down in there. And if you notice on these spark plugs, there is a compression washer on them. There's what the old one. You've got a little washer here. And when you put them in, you're literally going to just pinch it down, so you can just feel that washer compress, so it seals the compression in the engine. There we go, that's hand tight. Right, putting the ratchet back on. Literally, it is just right now. He's come to a stop, and now you're just going to go little nip like that, and that is tight enough. You're just sealing it. So now we're going to put the coil pack back on. Let's let that go down. Put the retaining screw in. I'm glad to say it seems to have stopped raining, or at least not rained any harder. Right, just nip that 10mm socket up. And obviously we're now going to go through and do the other three plugs and put the lid back on. I think we'll put that bracket there, which was on the floor, back on before we put it on there, because that'll be easier, save knocking it on the floor. So the rest is, as they say, the reassembly is the reverse of disassembly. So we'll put that all back together, and then hopefully the next little shot will be the car running a little nicely. So there we go. Well, there you go, folks. To compare and contrast, that's a brand new one in the middle, and that's two of the other ones I pulled out. And I think I've definitely had my money's worth out of those, and probably been wasting petrol for a bit of a while, because that wouldn't have given you very good ignition. And I have to say that the car has not been going particularly well, and does seem to have been using rather a lot of fuel, and I think hopefully that will be the explanation for that. Right, here we are, it's all back together. That plug back on, that hose back on, the 4 bolts that hold this back on, and the bolt over the back that holds that onto the bracket. I did the same thing with these as I did with the manifolds, and I put all 4 of these bolts in, and the one tucked underneath there, just up finger tight before you tighten them up, because, you know, it's just as good engineering practice, so you're not sort of tightening something down and twisting it and cracking it and all the rest of it. That hose there, I have to say, is not very good. I think it's a little bit beyond doing with mastic. Yeah, you could do that as you know, Sunday night, oh my god, I got to drive to work in the morning routine. The thing is, if you start sucking air in there, that's air going in after the mass airflow sensor, so you're likely to get some lean running or something like that going on. So like I say, everything's tightened up, all the bolts back in there, manifold bolts all tightened up. So we'll do the magic twist the key bit and hope that he starts. I haven't left anything hanging off. There you go. And reasonably quiet. There's a little bit of noise going on down there, alternator, but then again he has got 122,000 miles on the clock. So anyway, another successful job. Probably saved himself a few quid, and hopefully it'll do a few more miles without a lot of bother.